Okay. Okay, so welcome back to our season review of 2043. This is part two of this episode. Um, and I'm back. I'm Jonathan. I'm the GM of the Mariners. And with me, I have.
Hi, I'm Joseph, and I am the co-commissioner of PBC and the GM of the Monterrey Sultanes.
Yeah. And this will be an interesting part. We're both going to be looking at a division that we take part in. We'll be looking at our teams. And so we'll have hopefully quite a bit of insight to give you on that. And hopefully we don't go on for too long about our own teams. So we're starting off with the Vancouver Grizzlies. They started the season with no GM, with the AI. Interestingly enough, they were actually the other team that I was offered when I joined the league between the Mariners and the Grizzlies. And they were looking at another season of trying to compete for a World Series with their very strong core after coming up with the 2035 expansion. And I think before we got onto the trades, I think to summarize their season, it was a bit disappointing in the end.
Right after making three of the last four World Series, but losing to Pittsburgh each year, yeah, it was a little bit disappointing to get knocked out in their first round.
Yeah, the division series. And I think it's even more concerning when you look at their finances. They've been in the red for a little while now, and uh, a lot of their core are beginning to get very expensive. Um, we'll talk a little bit more about some of that later. But actually, no, let's talk about that now. Um, Dinardo is one guy I want to mention. This guy is an outstanding player, but he is on a 43 million contract this year. Not this year, next year, going into 2044. And this is his last ARB year. But if it's a 43 million contract in ARB, that contract in free agency is going to be enormous. This is going to be, I think you're going to be looking at either one team spends a crazy amount, or it might have to come down a little. He might have to come down a little bit with the amount that he's asking for, because I think this is almost a player who's too good for the league's finances to cope with.
Yes, former first overall pick, two-time MVP, Rookie of the Year, and five-time All-Star. Andy DiNardo is one of the best players in the game.
And he is only 26.
Right.
I mean, a guy that can hit for power, hit for contact. He gets on base with his eye. He doesn't strike out too much. He's fast. He runs the bases well, gets some steals in, and is a great outfielder. I mean, he's had a few defensive issues this year with a minus 3.3 zone rating, which isn't quite what he's performed at in the past. But I think very much an outstanding player for the Grizzlies and a key part of this core who I think the Grizzlies will very much struggle to replace next year with once he goes to free agency, when in the oncoming 2045 season, and I think that signals perhaps the end of their window. Would you agree?
I would certainly hope this is the end of their window.
A little bit of bias there, indeed, but I would agree. I think they've had a good run at playoffs, and sadly, nothing to show for it. I think they're a small market team whose finances have been propped up a bit by enormous fan interest and years of sustained success. And I think they're going to have quite a painful rebuild, with so much of that money disappearing with the fan interest going with the big players. And I don't think they have too many enormous contracts that are going to eat away at them for years to come, but they definitely are going to rue the missed chances at the World Series if they aren't able to make one last shot this year with their last dance.
Well, I absolutely agree, but they do have a couple bright sides in their going forward. They still have Jim Dean under team control for at least 4 more seasons.
Yep. And this is I think,
The
undisputed
reigning MVP.
MVP. This was his second season, and 180 WRC plus, 9.8 WAR, 3.45 average, league leading in all these categories. And I think if there was a joint MVP, he would win the MVP in the NL as well.
Yes.
And all this on a league minimum salary. So I think he is an excellent piece for them. And if the Vancouver Grizzlies decide to rebuild, the return they get from him will be absolutely enormous.
I agree. And Hannah has proved the current GM for Vancouver to be pretty
Shrewd
pretty
negotiator, perhaps.
shrewd negotiator.
I think if we have a look at some of those trades that she made after joining the team, we've got the first big trade she made was sending Tim Wall, who is one of their elite closers. You'd think it's completely illogical to trade away one of your elite closers in a year that you need to compete, and yet when he reached the Twins, he was poor.
Yes, and the player that they got for him, Steve Campos, was playing poorly in Minnesota. He comes to Vancouver, he's playing well.
It's like they swapped players, but the results stayed the same.
Right.
And they also received Greg Hobbs in that trade,
Yes.
with 60% retention, and a second round draft pick, which we will see how that turns out in the coming draft. Obviously, a rather low-ranked pick, considering the Twins' success, but still a second-round pick nonetheless.
Yes, and this may prove to be a very bad trade for Minnesota. They gave up a high price for Tim Wall.
Indeed, I mean Tim Wall still has some time to make the trade good, but
Right.
I think in a season where Anthony was looking to maybe do a little bit more, and with their record in one-run games being as poor as it was, he definitely could have used a better performance from Tim Wall.
Yes. Tim Wall was actually one of the trades that caused the most pandemonium in the league when Baltimore traded him to Vancouver.
And how come that caused so much
Not Baltimore, not Baltimore. It was another bird team. It was St. Louis. It was
St. Louis.
St. Louis that traded. Well, because St. Louis was giving up so much. Okay, I'm mixing things up. Let me pull up the trade real quick.
Yep, bear with us one moment.
Yeah, he was traded by Vancouver to St. Louis in exchange for some prospects who are still.
St. Louis to Vancouver for Dean Landman, who is a elite pitching prospect for St. Louis, and 2 first-round picks.
Right.
And those are 2 first-round picks in
2040.
The 2041 draft, wouldn't it be?
Right, the 2041 draft.
So let me see. I'm just going to pull up the 2041 draft, and we can look at precisely what they managed to get for those 2 first-round picks. And that should give us a better idea of how valuable the trade was.
Looks like they got Kamari Bowie and Mike White.
So
Mike White, who just started playing in the majors last season.
St. Louis. Who's this for? So for the 2041 draft, you're saying?
Right. Pick number 32 was Mike White, and they also had pick number 22, Kamari Bowie, and
Very pretty.
I think the 13th pick was their own, Sabian Pinagar.
Got it. Got it. So some interesting performers, and maybe something that maybe a trade that will be more easy to evaluate in the coming years. But I think this trade for sure, Vancouver will be happy with the way it turned out. Although I think there is always going to be that question in my mind as to could they have done more with Tim Wall in that bullpen going into playoffs? Um, could
Right.
that have made that difference in that, there's only one game in that series they needed to win to be able to get past Voodoo, and it didn't happen. In terms of their offense, aside from Jim Dean and Donato, a big performer, but Mendoza, Stetz, and
Thunderbat.
Olkowick were excellent.
Yes, I think you should talk about Thunderbat as well.
Thunderbat Catarini,
Yes.
the former Create a Prospect by Anthony from his winning seasons with the Pirates. I think he's an outstanding player. 90 gap power, 80 home run power, and 80 speed. And how he does that with the amount of weight that he's carrying. Let me find what his weight is. Can you find what his weight is?
His weight is
360 pounds and 6'9". So an absolute unit of a player. I can only imagine how big his strike zone is, and that might go some way to explaining a 40 avoid Ks. But I think while he's an excellent player, he had a disappointing season for me.
yes.
Only
That's
101 WRC plus.
yes, and 0.7 WAR, 198 batting average, 258 on base percentage, and a career low in slugging with 514. But he still hit 52 home runs.
Which is incredible.
Yes, and he had led the American League in home runs the last 4 seasons, hitting 76 home runs and 202 RBIs in 2040.
Wow. And 2041, 2042 also leading home runs and
Yes,
ISO. And in fact, plate appearances too in 2041. But I think that strikeout rate of 27.8 is really, really hurts his WAR. The fact he plays DH also very much hurts his WAR. And the fact that he's below the Mendoza line
yes,
is really. I think he's one of those Carl Schwarber type players that is questionable how much you can provide to the team with just one real uh, one real aspect going for you. And unlike Schwarber, this guy doesn't even walk.
right. But he has that speed once he gets on base.
Indeed. And he'll probably run straight into second base, despite the ball already getting there 5 seconds ago with 20 base running. Now, another guy I want to
Lu-
mention.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to mention Luis Mendoza you were talking about.
Yeah, Mendoza, strong
Yeah,
guy,
he is. He's a free agent now.
free agent. Which position did he play? Was he first base?
I believe so.
Yeah,
I
first
believe he
base.
played. He played 97 games at first base, 61 games at left field, and 4 games in right.
Yep. A strong performer. I think 4.1 WAR at first base, 138 WRC. You're looking at another great slugger, 36 home runs, and just a general good season. I think he's going to be sorely missed.
I believe he will be too.
Um, Another guy to mention I mentioned Stetz. had a good season. Still quite young at 25. He even actually spent some of the season in AAA. I don't know if that was an injury rehab assignment, but 131 WRC plus. The offense in Vancouver is really quite something. You even have Tomko, who is a 23-year-old guy making his debut season. He had a cameo of 157 at-bats, and yet during that cameo, 142 WRC+. So there's still some good young players coming through. Another guy I want to mention is Gaitan, the backup catcher of the year, but with a potential of 80 and a very good year with 130 WRC+. I think he'll be taking the starting role going into next year.
It's going to be interesting to see how many home runs he hits in a full year, and if he's going to split his duties between DH and catching with that bat.
Yes, for sure. Pitching wise, I think you had
Esteban Ramirez.
Yeah, Ramirez is absolutely elite. 75 movement and 65 control, makes up for slightly worse stuff with 55, but he's an extreme ground baller with reasonably high velocity, 55 stamina, 75 hold runners, and 2 elite pitches with two decent pitches to go along with it. This is your classic fastball curveball guy.
Yes, and he's a 4-time Cy Young winner.
Yeah, it is.
He came over in a trade from Colorado.
And defensively, he was good on the mound this year with a Golden Glove for the first time in his career.
Yes, 2.7 zone rating. I think that was the highest among pitchers last season.
Indeed, and they still have him for a few more years. They've got 3 more years on that deal. On what I think, looking back at it now, it was a very team-friendly deal.
Well, absolutely. He's worth a lot more than 21 million.
I think in the open market, he'd get maybe 32, 34.
Yeah, maybe even 40.
Maybe even 40. Goldberg.
Goldberg, yes. And Juan Bravo.
Yeah, Bravo, who is no longer with the Grizzlies now. He has gone into free agency, and I believe, am I correct in saying that he's actually been picked up by a team?
Yes, he has signed already.
And who's he signed with?
Washington.
So Washington is looking to compete again after some poor years. We'll look at that rebuild in another episode when we look at the team's prospects going into 2044. But yeah, Bravo, an outstanding performer for Vancouver. With I think it's safe to say, just a great all-round performance.
Yes. Yes, 3.71 ERA, 204 innings pitched. He was just as effective at eating innings as Ramirez was and Goldberg.
Yep. And I think that the backup guys, the guys at 4 and 5 were serviceable.
Abel Wilkinson has a 75 potential that he hasn't even reached yet.
Yeah. And he played quite a bit in the pen as well. But Wilkinson and who's the other guy that we've got? Wilkinson and Torrell. Torrell's nothing special, 45-45, low movement, gives up quite a few home runs. But, 99 ERA plus, this guy was, a good number 5.
Yes.
From the pen, I think Chris Nash, we spoke about the trade earlier. A great.
Oh, I don't think we did.
Did we not? We missed out the Chris Nash trade. Now, the Chris Nash trade was, I believe, coming from
the New York Mets.
Yes. They traded Chris Nash and Juan Escobedo for Bobby Nelson and stone burner.
Yes, two minor leaguers who I still think Vancouver got the best of the deal because Nash and Escobedo was nasty down the stretch.
Yeah. And I think it really can't be overstated how good Nash was. 0.46 ERA, 0.81 WHIP, and a 931 ERA plus 2.14 FIP. This is an incredible turnaround because he didn't play well in New York.
No, he didn't.
And Escobedo was also nasty. 0.63 ERA, 0.84 WHIP, 679 ERA plus. I don't know what Vancouver did to these pitchers, but they were excellent coming into Canada.
Yes, and just like with Steve Campos.
Indeed. Now, speaking of other guys in the pen, Tim Wall, he wasn't good when he got to the Twins.
No, but he was great in Vancouver.
He was. And so I think the pen was good.
Yes.
Defensively, they were average. There was a bright spot in Jim Dean. The guy's an absolute phenom. And Donato wasn't great, but as we've spoken about, a key position with high offensive production, we can excuse that. And I think looking at their farm, it's looking a bit rough. They are beginning to show wear and tear from years of trying to compete.
Yes, it's pretty bare, and they don't have anybody that appears to be ready to move into the majors just now.
No, I think a lot
They
of
still
their
look still a
I
lot
think a lot
of
of their
still
I think a lot of their top guys are more recent draft picks.
yes, and it looks like they're still about 1, 2, 3 years away, most of them.
And Tommy Reeder is a left-hand starting pitching prospect who is sort of really headlining that system at number 66 in OSA rankings. But when you look a bit more closely at him, he's making good progress, and I think he definitely presents, hopefully, someone that can come sooner than later, with already hitting 35 overall and starting to pitch in AAA at the end of last year, at the end of the year.
Yes, didn't do too well, but it was a small sample size and only 9 innings pitched.
Yeah, you can basically throw it out the window. He is fragile, though.
Yes, he is.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to mention about the Grizzlies? I think overall, a
Overall,
disappointing
I think they're
season.
going to disappointing season, but I still think they're going to be in the mix going into 2044.
Yeah, I think that's about accurate. And it'll be interesting to see what direction Hannah takes them in. All right. All right, so now looking at the Minnesota Genes or Twins. I think we had a real season of Genes ball with them. They had very much had a style that they kept to. They would win, outrageous scoring games. You'd be looking at, sort of 16-2, on a relatively regular basis. And yet, the next day, they would lose by 1 run. It would be 2-1, and they'd lose. And I think their 1-run record was about 8 wins and 12 losses. And I think the bullpen additions were smart as an attempt to rectify this. Didn't always work out, but I think that's definitely the way the team ended up looking. I think before we look at how they did over the season and their postseason, should we look at the numerous trades that Anthony cooked up for us?
Yes, we've already talked about a few of them. We talked about the Steve Campos trade, both of them.
And this is in the first part, which was looking at the AL East.
East.
But yes, to sort of to summarize, we think the Campos trade wound up relatively poorly for Minnesota.
Yes, but it still has a chance to work itself out with the with Tim Wall now with Minnesota,
Of
who
course.
Steve Campbell was later traded.
And the other one that we haven't looked at
Uh,
is a trade where they dumped Joe Price to the Cardinals,
right.
and they got some.
They uh, Minnesota didn't get anything back in that trade, but they dumped Joe Price and his salary, and they sent Omari Brooms and Ken Marcham to St. Louis for cash, $1 to be exact. But yeah, and then if you want to look at Ken Marcham, he he's not ranked currently, but he did just win the MVP award in the rookie ACL League Championship Series.
Yeah, so maybe a guy that's flying under the radar a little bit. Well, at least until this podcast.
Yes, yes, Ken Marchand does look like he might be a pretty good player for St. Louis in the future, and I think Kenny and the Cardinals did well with that trade.
Yeah, and I think a, a, a good trade for the Twins too, though, because of the money that they took off the books.
Right. Ah, Joe Price was making. How much was he making? He was making $19 million.
Yeah, so it's a fairly considerable dump.
Yes,
And was it just for 1 year?
and just for 1 year.
Mm.
And he's never really achieved much in his career. He's kind of bounced around in from the being used in the pen and being used as a starter.
And how did
I
Joe
think he
Price
had it
perform last year? This year, I mean.
this year. He was used in the bullpen by Atlanta because St. Louis cut him, and Atlanta, the
Ah,
AI, signed him.
so it ended up just being a pure dump.
Yes,
Interesting, interesting. Now, another trade that the Twins pulled off was getting Josh Croft.
who
Um,
was a big part of that their their rotation this year.
Indeed. And Josh Croft, I believe, is a strong left-handed uh, pitcher. We're looking at a
Yes,
guy that uh, his ERA was at 4.42, which is maybe a little disappointing, but he started 36 games, which is league leading. Um,
yes, and
Availability,
in uh he also led the league in strikeouts per 9 innings with 10.4.
which, as I'm sure experienced GMs here will realise, is only going to lead to a good FIP, and it was a good FIP of 3.72. Um, so I think perhaps someone whose results didn't really bear out the performance that he put in.
Right.
Um,
And they gave up a first round draft pick, which became Alfredo Serrano, and they gave up their shortstop, Roddy bin Aid, who spent most of the season in center field for the Reds.
Indeed, and I think we've mentioned it's probably a beneficial trade for both clubs. Um,
Yes.
you know, the Twins got themselves a good pitcher. He is fragile, so we'll see whether he can maintain his healthy record into next year. But it's a good pitcher, and while they gave up some strong players, well, a strong player in Radi Bin Ayad, um, they'll be okay with that. And actually, that first round pick turned out to be Alfredo Serrano, who, after being drafted out of college, he's dipped a bit. So I think they'll be happy with overall where that trade has gone, and Cincinnati won't be too upset at having acquired Radi Bin Ayad.
Then the other trade that we already mentioned, but was the Gonzalez trade with Detroit.
And obviously, they've given up a fair amount here. We don't know
But
quite how much yet because the 2044 first round pick is yet to come.
right,
But I think the Twins may have won this deal.
yes, especially with getting Gonzalez's contract retained throughout
Yeah.
his the length of his contract through 2045.
I think having that uh, elite performer on such a cheap contract for them is going to be incredible for the Twins going forward.
Yes, yeah, he's set to make 22 million in 2044, and he has a player option for 20 million in 2045, all retained.
All retained. Yeah, that could get very expensive for the Tigers, and is probably going to be a large part of why they will struggle to compete for a little while. And if they do compete, it will be working around that.
Yes, but he was an elite reliever, an elite closer while in Detroit. 2 Reliever of the Year awards, 5 All-Star appearances, and a World Series ring with the 2035 Tigers.
Indeed. And with the profile of the Twins, there may be more on the way.
Yes, yes, Anthony has won 7 World Series with Pittsburgh, and he turned Minnesota around in this first year, and he's got some great things cooking in Minnesota.
Indeed. And the last trade that we've got was the deadline acquisition of Tim Wall. We've talked about this a little bit in part one, more from the perspective of uh, the Grizzlies. I think disappointing that he didn't turn out um, as well as they'd hoped in his first year there, or his first half year. Um, and it was quite an expensive return that they gave up with Greg Hobbs for 60% retained for the rest of that year. Obviously a rental, and Steve Campos obviously going over, um, and also the second round pick in 2044, leaving the Twins now with very few draft picks in the early rounds next year. Um, but we are looking, I think, at a large volume of trades. And when you have a large volume of trades, there's inevitably one or two that don't quite go your way.
Right.
Uh,
Yes, so Minnesota only has their fourth round pick next season. They also gave up their third and fifth, but then we'll talk about that later.
yeah. So I think looking more at the Twins' performance this year, if we look at their postseason, I think they'll be sad to have got knocked out in the division series. They would have hoped for a little bit more, but they overcame a strong Sultans lineup in your team, um, and they did take two games off of the World Series champions, which is the hardest they were ever pushed in the postseason.
Right.
I think their issues with one-run games were quite apparent. Um, they did, however, fix that slightly in the postseason with 2 one-run wins against the Sultans, although that may have been more to do with the Sultans' pen, which we will talk
Yes.
about shortly. Um, Now, another thing to note here is that they were, I think, division title favourites coming into the last half of the season. Um, they were looking very good. They were at the top of the standings. Um, Anthony was clearly very happy in SimChat, but a very tough final 2 weeks. I think if you get up their schedule, if I get that up now.
Yes, they they ended up going on a 7 game losing streak in the last couple weeks of September, losing in Kansas City, Vancouver, and losing to Anaheim. And they also lost 2 games in a 4 game series to Seattle and 2 games in a 3 game series to Monterrey.
And the worst part of that is, I mean, admittedly, that is a tough schedule. But Vancouver, that's a team they were competing with, and they were the team that they lost the division to by one game. So they just needed to win one of these games. And two of those games that they lost were one-run losses, including one that went to the 14th inning. The game on Wednesday, September the 23rd, they lost to a walk-off in the 14th with, let me see who walked it off. Josh Tomko, the guy we mentioned earlier from the Grizzlies, getting the game-winning hit with a run-scoring single. And Wilborn, who lost it in the final, with Gonzalez and Wall already having had to be used. But in fact, in this game, it was Tim Wall who blew the save. So a tough game for the Genes.
And if you're to look at their second half compared to their first half, they played really well in their second half of the season. They were 47-42 and 5 games back of first place when going into the All-Star break.
Yeah, and I think a strong season that I think the final 2 weeks could be partially explained by them running out of gas a little. This was a team with a lot of rookies. They had Villarreal, Guerrero, Devore, and Carrillo all had solid rookie seasons and represent the future of this franchise.
And Carrillo was a Rule 5 pick.
He was. Sadly, I arrived probably real life 1 week too late to prevent this. And the Rule 5 had already occurred. This guy was, it would appear, already boosting as he reached the Rule 5 draft, was unprotected, and has now turned into an elite DH in Minnesota. Ron Elder is another rookie who didn't have such a great season. He struggled, but I think he's still got room to grow. That potential is enormous, and I think Anthony will be banking on him having a bounce back.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he's only 20 years old.
Yeah, so very young, and I don't think that they can be blamed for having a couple of bad weeks at the end of the season, considering the performances they were able to turn in for much of the year.
Yes, you also have Sincere Hardman, who had a great season as well.
Yep, Hardman and Crakes, both big producers in the lineup, and I think
Olean.
Yeah, for sure.
Olean led the team in RBIs.
Yeah. But I think in terms of the actual offensive production, would it be accurate to say that they were big in games that didn't matter, but overall maybe a bit lighter than you would expect from a team competing for the very top of the division?
Yeah, at times they seem very very inconsistent in their during the season.
Hot and cold.
Yes, very hot and cold. And just like you
I,
said, they'd blow out a team and then lose by one game, one run the next game.
yeah, and I think it's important that these guys that do all of this offensive production produce, because when you have a shortstop like Josh Reed, who is very much a defensive shortstop, you need those big bats to produce.
Josh Reed
Moving,
still had a pretty good year with 14 home runs, 74 RBIs.
he did, and I think when we talk about the defense, he will definitely be a big part of that. But speaking of defense, pitching wise, Tommy Peters was an outstanding player for the team in his first full seasons. He made 4 cameo starts in 42 and he was okay, but I think he showed a lot more of what he's capable of this year. I think OSA underrates him somewhat.
I agree. He has yet to show his true potential in the league.
Indeed. And with his stamina, I think he's a good candidate to go long in games for Minnesota.
I mean, at 23, he went 205 innings.
Yeah. And this year, and even before, played 4 games and went 23 innings and 42. So
And that was a very good trade for Minnesota.
Go ahead.
Oh, Minnesota picked Peters up in a trade in 2038 from Vancouver.
Okay, yeah. What was that trade?
Vancouver traded Tommy Peters to Minnesota along with Jorge Horeta and Chris Edwards in exchange for Anthony Caterini.
Caterini himself.
Yes,
I think they got a good deal for that.
I believe they did too.
Huerta, it appears, has retired. He was left at 2020 in his final year. I don't think he ever made the big leagues. Let's just see.
Chris Edwards is a defensive marvel at second base. Big part of their defense now.
Indeed. We'll probably take a look at that as well. Now, the other aspect of this pitching performance, I think Jaeger, he squeezed another strong season out. I think at 35, he was a much needed veteran presence. But I think there are certainly questions about whether he can keep that up. There are definitely signs of regression with his performances and with his overall ratings. That stuff is beginning to drop, and with a velocity of 92 to 94 miles an hour, his stuff is beginning to get a bit predictable.
Yes. Yes, he is. He's not going to. He might be a serviceable reliever, but I think he needs to be out of the rotation.
I think I would agree with that. And with I believe 20 million left to pay on this coming year, I think he's going to be a very expensive piece. And it's understandable that Anthony's already signalled his intention to try and salary dump him. Although that could be tricky with the no trade clause Jaeger has got inserted there. In terms of the pen, Wilbon and Dvorak were very strong. Wilbon had a 2.58 ERA and Dvorak had a 2.36 ERA. There were other decent performers, but I think those were the main ones. And I think, yeah, in general, they can be pretty happy with that. Dvorak, I already mentioned, had a very good starting season, 1.45 ERA, but only 14 appearances. I'll be interested to see what he can produce next year. I think the OSA rating of 45 probably doesn't do justice to his ability.
Yes, he's no longer with Minnesota.
Ah, is he not? Did he free agency or?
Oh no, a trade. He was traded in 2043 offseason.
43 off season? Is that Dvorak, you say?
Yeah, Dvorak.
Who's he gone to?
Santo Domingo.
I think we'll be hearing that a lot.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So that's an interesting trade from after what turns out it was not his first season. He did actually play for the Pirates in 2041 for Anthony. So this is a guy that he's brought over from the Pirates after having left. In fact, I think he may have sent. No, yeah, he traded for him after arriving in Minnesota. Clearly, someone he rated. Let's have a look at that deal. Roger Tillio is a nothing catcher, and Josh Jones is it's a reasonable left field prospect, but nothing special yet. So I think he may have won that trade. Yeah, that's a DH with very raw ratings at 20 years old. I think Anthony's won that trade with the Pirates. Defensively, generally a very strong team. This is a trademark of Anthony's great teams. Defensive talisman Josh Reed, outstanding defensive performance, 9.8 zone rating, and the rest of the team, there's no holes.
No, it's very rare that you find bad defensive players on one of his teams.
Indeed. The closest I think we got to that was Villarreal with minus 2.8. And even then, it's covered by most of the other guys he had on his team.
Yeah, and he only played in
729 innings, so
729 innings at center field, but he belongs at third base.
yes. And Murillo came in and got 2.7 zone rating, which made up for it. That was a strong debut there from him as well, who I think is looking like more of a defensive first centre fielder. Now, farm-wise, I think the Twins, it's not looking as good as it used to be.
No, but they are ranked the number 2 farm system in PBC right now.
Are they? Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, they got
a lot of their top.
4.
No, go ahead.
They got 4 players in the top 100 who are they got 121 points. I'm sorry, they're the third ranked. They're behind Oakland, Montreal, and then Minnesota.
Yep. And I think the interesting thing there is Ron Erler is going to disappear off that very shortly. He's already made his major league debut. Guerrero will be disappearing shortly too. He's made his major league debut. So I think actually looking at their system, it's maybe a little bit misleading because after those 4 top guys, this farm system's looking very barren.
Yes. And he gave up. The Twins traded most of their draft picks for 2044, so this may be pretty barren for a while.
Indeed. I think Vassallo is a strong point in that farm system. Number 7 overall prospect in the league, and I think he's getting close to promotion as well.
Yes, it says OSA has his ETA as 2044, but I believe he probably could make a debut in 2043.
2044 is next year.
That is correct. He's going to be making a debut next year.
But he won't be making a debut for the first 4 games of the season because he
No.
is still suspended after having a brawl at the end of the year. So clearly someone with a bit of fight in him as well. I think overall, looking at the Twins, I think they've served as a warning this year of what's to come. There's a lot of very strong young players on this team, and I think we could be looking at another era of domination if we can't find some strong challenges to the Genes.
Yes, and Anthony has not missed the playoffs since 2031.
That is how many years is that? 13-year streak.
Yes.
So, Anthony in playoffs, a match made in heaven. Anyway, let's move on. I think the next team is the Sultans. So, the Sultans. Joseph, do you want to lead off on this one?
Yeah, the Sultanes made their first playoff appearance in 23 years. They haven't made the playoffs since 2020 when they were still the Cleveland Indians. And it was a very exciting season going into it because I just had my first 500 wins, 500 above 500 season in 2042, but just missed the playoffs. I was really looking forward to 2043 and competing. And at the beginning of the year, it didn't really look like I was competing very well. Uh, and we could talk a little more about that.
Yeah, I think we can talk a little bit more about that. I think going into the season, you made some interesting trades.
There was one big trade that I made right before the season started, in which I traded a couple minor league relievers in the name of Chris Sutherland and Dan Costner, and $7.5 million, a third and a fourth round pick to Seattle for uh, former Cy Young winner Vincente Bamba.
Indeed, and this was a trade that I was part of. In hindsight, maybe one for me to regret. At the time, I heavily needed the money, and could probably have gotten more, but I had other deals waiting. Another deal that we will talk about, I think, just after this team, with the Klug trade. I needed the money to finance that deal, and resultingly, I was maybe too quick to trade Bumper here, and he certainly spited me with his season, with an excellent pitching performance that did start to tail off at the end. We can look at his
Yes.
pitching splits. Find that now.
Bamba ended up ranking 10th in the AL in ERA, fourth in wins, and sixth in WHIP.
Yes, and I think he had league leading BABIP for most of that.
Yes.
But yeah, in August, May, June, July, you're looking at 140 ERA plus, 175, 136, 188. Then in August, he had 6 games and only 7.5 ERA. Recovered in September a little bit, but that month of August really hurt his Cy Young chances.
Yeah, I don't think he would have gotten the Cy Young. His WAR was too low and his FIP was too high.
Yeah, I think it might have been. I think that's probably what August showed, is that this was a player who had a very good year, but he was maybe not quite as good as the results suggest.
Yes, and he was just a rental. I had no way of re-signing him. He
Indeed.
rejected my qualifying offer.
And I think that's another thing that needs to be taken into account when you're looking at this trade.
Yes.
That qualifying offer, what are you getting for it? Is that a second or a third?
I believe it's not really sure. It's either a second or a third.
Either a second
But
or third.
but I don't think he's going to be re-signed in free. I don't think he's going to be signed in free agency this year. He probably will go unsigned until spring training or the season starts and
Indeed, I
sign for
can
a
see
1 year
that.
deal.
I could definitely see that happening. And I think the Bomber trade as a whole, Sutherland, if we're being realistic, Sutherland was good. He was a good reliever. He's a borderline starter. He could potentially start, but he's likely not going to be able to make that push to become a full-time starter. And he's probably just not good enough to make the rotation of most teams. so probably better out of the pen. He had an outrageous run at one point where he went 10 innings without giving up a single run with multiple appearances. But yeah, definitely not worth Bomber. And that wasn't the only trade you made, was it?
No, no. I also traded. This was right at the trade deadline. I traded away my 2044 second round pick, and rookie league pitchers Joe Bournes, Joe Crotchet, and Eric Anderson to the Washington Nationals for Joe Carter with his salary, with 75% of his salary retained for the next 2 seasons.
And Carter's looking good. He had
Yes, he is. He is old, but yeah, he looked good at the last half of the season for me. He helped solidify an outfield I was having trouble with.
and that last year is a vesting option. Um, I'm not entirely sure. So 550 plate appearances in that final year, and with him being fragile, I'm not sure that's a guarantee.
Uh, yeah, so that's a pretty big salary that he's being paid.
Indeed, I think it's safe to say that Washington is very much hoping he gets injured in 2040, 2045.
Or that he retires in 2044.
Indeed, he is getting, really to quite an old age for a pitcher. His arm
Yes.
is going to be jelly by the end of his career.
Oh, he's a outfielder.
Outfielder, not a pitcher. Brain fart, sorry. Um, yes, his arm is still going to be jelly from throwing that ball back. Um, and I think will be interesting to see how those fielding ratings hold up with the range and that arm. Will he be able to keep that going? Because if he can't, we could be looking at a DH.
Right. Well, which will be very bad because I already have a DH settled with Longacre.
True. Although Longacre, I think, is probably good enough in the field to play third.
But I have Cole Kelly there, so that's why I moved him to DH because Cole Kelly is a better third baseman.
Indeed. And Cole Kelly is another young, cost-controlled guy. So that
Yes.
DH spot is unlikely to be opening up.
Right. So I may have to move Joe Carter at some point if it does become a problem.
Indeed. And I think that will be something to watch out for when evaluating this trade.
Yes, I still
Before,
think that as of right now, I won the trade.
yes, I mean, you made playoffs. You ended the drought, and I think you are unfortunate to come up against a very, very strong Twins side in the first round in the wild card.
Yes, that series was a pretty big disappointment.
Yeah,
But it was just so nice that after this long rebuild to make it to the playoffs.
yeah. I think we spoke a little bit about Bombo with the pitching. I think we'll do pitching before hitting this time. The pitching, as on the whole, was pretty decent.
Yes,
Marineo,
especially the starting rotation. My starter's ERA was 3.83, which was the third best in the league. I led the league in strikeouts. I was fourth in pitching WAR. Yes, you had Marineo, Riley, Airy, Bamba,
I think that's in
and
spite of Schaefer having a not such a great year.
no, and I have him for one more year.
Yes. Um, so
Yes.
I think the
Schaefer may
issue
have
here,
seen his best years
yeah,
behind him.
I think the issues here is that Schaefer, 36, he's got his best years behind him, and Bomba obviously gone. So it's going to be a question of how expensive is it to retain this pitching lineup um, going forward. And can that be affordable considering, if we move to the offense, we'll look at the bullpen in a bit, Pac's contract?
Yes.
Now
Pac's
tell me, Joseph,
contract.
how much does Pac make a year?
Well, he is going to be making 60.5 million in 2044 and 66.5 million the next two seasons, 45 and
Yes.
46 before it
So
starts going
in
down
total,
again.
he makes 30 times Longacre's salary.
Yes. Wait, Longacre makes league minimum.
Exactly. Not
So that would
30.
actually be
No,
100.
120 times the other way
Yeah.
around. Yeah. So I don't think he's quite 120 times the player that Longacre is either. But
Oh,
he was a strong contributor.
well, this was the second year in a row that Pac finished second in MVP voting.
Yeah. I think he'll be very unlucky not to finish with a MVP at some point in his career. And he's just generally a very strong player. But do you think he's worth the contract he's on?
I would say that he is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
I'm
mean, if
guessing
you,
there was a bidding war involved for this guy.
yes, the Carlos and the Angels was the team I was bidding up against. And
Yes.
once it got to like 400 million 10 years, I think he stopped. I kept going.
Yes. And
And Pac now has the most expensive contract in PBC history by $1.
that's that's pretty amusing. And does he, if I remember correctly, he has a little snippet on the Slack channel as well, doesn't he?
Yes, yes. When you type in Pac, uh, you get something about the last guy who had yeah, the $500 million man.
Yes. Let me test that now.
Oh, Endo. Endo weeps at the size of his contract. Endo was the
Oh,
last guy.
weeps. Yeah.
He was the last guy with the largest contract, and that was 500 million. And he was signed by Cleveland.
So big money moves for this franchise, and he was a very strong offensive part of production. Uh,
That was yes.
Other big parts of the production for your lineup?
Bill Real
Yep.
and Bill Real, Kelly Longacre, Kevin O'Neill,
Yep.
Joe Carr, well, Mikey Hunt, Luis Mullins, even though he had a down year, and Mike Wheelis was a big part of my lineup for years. He had a pretty bad year, but he started to turn it around at the end of the season.
Yep. And he's still young.
Yes, he's 25.
Yeah. And you also had a strong performance from your backup catcher this year.
Yes, yes, both of my catchers did very well. Luis Morales and Jared Rangel, Rangel,
Yeah, I think
Rangel.
Randjelovic was, I think, probably justified a position as maybe a starting catcher rather than a backup.
Oh, I had him doing I had him platooning.
Platooning. Yeah.
Yes. Uh, Rangelovic would start against lefties, and Morales would start against righties.
Cool. Cool. And I think one maybe more of a defensive catcher and one maybe more of an offensive catcher.
Yes, yes, I think Morales is more of the defensive catcher.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah, his he had a 9 framing rate. and while catcher framing runs, while Randall Jovic had negative 4.7, so he cost me 4.7 runs or
Indeed.
4.7. Yeah,
And Longacre is a guy that we haven't mentioned quite that much. What do you make of his rookie year?
it was absolutely amazing. He came into the league and hit five straight home runs in his first 5 games. I believe it was 5 home runs in 5 straight games. And he really propelled this team moving forward. We were kind of sluggish to start off the season, but once Longacre got called up, everything just kind of clicked.
Yeah, I think he hit, what was it, 3 or 4 home runs in his debut week?
Yes, yes, I believe it was. He ended up hitting 40 on the year.
Yeah, and despite missing part of the year, and I think while it made sense for you to play him at DH, if he had played third base, I think he maybe comes close to what Gumlaw produced war-wise.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely could play third base. It's just that I think Kelly is a better defender.
Yeah, it totally makes sense for you to play Kelly at third base instead of him. I'm just thinking purely from the stats perspective of Longacre. Um, and I think he was very unfortunate to be going up against such an elite performer in Gumlaw with the Rookie of the Year. Suspect
Oh
if he
yeah,
was in the NL, he would have been Rookie of the Year.
that is true.
And he thoroughly deserved that Silver Slugger.
Yes, and Cole Kelly, with his first All Star game appearance, and he led the league in stolen bases again.
Yep,
And he had 120 runs, 200 hits, 200 plus hits. He almost hit 50 doubles as well. Yeah, he's a really great player.
yeah.
Yeah, yep.
And I think that brings us round to the big issue with this team, and I think what ultimately killed this team's playoff run, and that's the bullpen.
Oh, one more thing about Jeff
Yeah,
Villarreal. He Jeff Villarreal, his second All Star game appearance in 2 years, and his second Silver Slugger. He led the league in home runs with 54, RBIs with 147, and slugging with 636. He missed the Rookie of the Year award last season. He finished second to Andy Haight from Montreal, my dad's team, and he came in third in AL MVP behind Pack and crap, who won the MVP? Jim Dean.
indeed. Yeah, and all at 24, so definitely a very strong performer for this lineup. And I think the young lineup that you've got here is, very, very important for your success. And I would, normally suggests a strong future, but obviously with the size of Pac's contract, it's going to be tricky
It's going
to
to be
continue
difficult.
success.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult. I might be throwing all my chips in just to win a championship in 2044, 2045 before everything gets a little too expensive. I got to tear it down, but we'll see.
And going to that bullpen that I mentioned,
Yes.
what do you think of it?
Well, outside of Schaefer, I think everybody was pretty bad. I ended up shipping out Tony Vernon for like a 10th round pick. Uh, uh, Chris Ford was horrible. He
Yep,
ended up having a 9.46 ERA and a 7.47 FIP.
indeed.
Yeah, I mean,
And
I I literally expected like the just to bombard my opponents with runs, so I won't have to go to my bullpen, or they can just just not have to worry about anything. But that very rarely happened.
indeed. And Ironically, it was in fact Schaefer who gave up that walk-off hit in the 5-4 loss to Minnesota in Game 2 of the wildcard series. But he was pitching in the second inning of his bid there, normally a one inning guy.
Yes.
And I think part of that was driven by the lack of alternative options.
Yeah. That's a big issue going into 2044 is the bullpen.
Uh, and yeah, as I said, losing 2 walk-off games in the playoffs, high drama. And I think despite that, fans of the team will look back on it fondly. They made the playoffs, and that will always be a big achievement.
Yes. Big achievement. One of the most mismanaged teams in PBC.
Yep,
And I'm happy I was the one to get him out of this drought.
yeah. Looking at sort of first defence, Tremel and O'Neill were excellent in the middle infield. We've mentioned about Pac's defensive issues. Overall,
Yes.
a good defensive team. So well done putting that together.
Yes.
Um,
Third in the AL in zone rating.
yeah, Mike Bishop has a strong second year um, in the farm.
Yes.
Going towards looking at the farm system. I think I think that it's generally quite a quite a shallow system at this point. But
Yeah.
there's some interesting guys there.
You definitely have some guys who have some really good upswing, but they're pretty far away from being in the majors. One guy who
Yes.
will be on the roster in 2044 is Tim Verkus. He's a guy who was let go by Houston, and he started boosting when I signed him to a minor league contract. I mean,
Very
he's
nice
25.
find.
He's 25, but I'll take any help I can get.
Yeah, for sure. Um, and he did indeed make his debut in late September, I think.
Yes, but he just
Uh,
did not. Well, he only had 3 at bats.
yes, but I think he hit in absolutely none of them.
Right.
3 at bats, 4 plate appearances, um, 1 base on ball.
Yeah, so I'm interested to see what he does in a full season. I'm pretty sure that he's going to be on my opening day roster.
Interesting. Yeah, definitely be one to watch. Um, I think we've spoken about the financial situation, but yeah, money is getting tight.
Yes,
And
yes,
I think it will be important that this season of success doesn't become the peak of this core.
oh, yeah. But one bright spot is that in 2045, uh, Schaefer's contract falls off, and
Yeah,
2046, Marineo's gone.
yes. So
So
there will be
hopefully,
money coming off the table.
yes, there'll be money
All right,
coming off the table, but uh, I'll be putting that money right back into arbitration for a lot of these young guys.
of course. Be interesting to see what sort of returns you might be able to get on some of the guys you don't want to offer arbitration for, and might need to look at trading.
Right.
All right, so that was the Sultanes. Have you got anything else to add?
Uh, just that I was third in attendance.
The Mexicans love baseball.
Yes.
All right, so we'll move on to much, much further north, and instead of the hitter-friendly ballpark of the Sultanes, a slightly less hitter-friendly environment. I am, of course, talking about the Seattle Mariners, my team, who have quite the pitcher's park. Um, so I think, Joseph, you'll agree with me. This was a bit of a surprising year.
Yes, yes. When the preseason predictions were put out in April, OSA or the AI was predicting that you were only going to win 66 games.
Indeed, and I think 66 games would have put me in third to last place in this division.
Yes.
And in fact, worse than any other worse than any AL East team at all. So I think a substantial improvement on the AI's prediction. 21 games, 21 wins more. I think it would be accurate to say that we got lucky to a degree.
I
I think,
I think I think you did an excellent job managing your team, and you came in with a lot of budget issues, and you were able to put a team on the field, and it was really nice to see that.
yeah, I remember when I came in, I was looking at I think it was a minus 4.5 million deficit. Um, uh, to put this into a bit of context, the Mariners have been a generally very successful team in terms of making playoffs. They have made playoffs 6 times in the last 8 years. And in general, they've never been the big bad team. Of those, none of them were first place finishers. They did win 98 games in 36 and 97 and 41. But in general, what this has led to is strong fan interest and a strong financial position from playoff revenue. Unfortunately, when I believe Mike, the old GM, left the Mariners, they did end up under the stewardship of the AI, who did not have much success with them in 2042, missing out on playoffs, and resultingly, my owner, in all of his glory and wisdom, cut my budget by 20 million as a punishment. And this was not welcome for a team that had a number of questionable financial commitments. And we'll get to some of that in a moment. So we've spoken about the trade, some of these trades already that were put down by my Mariners. The trade with Sutherland coming over and Kostner. One thing we didn't know here, Kostner has been so-so. He's probably never going to make the majors. And the third round pick was traded to Boston for that wild trade that we spoke about later. The fourth round pick ended up being Randy Brown, who is a defensively good shortstop. We'll see how he goes. But he's not looking like anything particularly special yet. And other trades. Which trades haven't we mentioned?
We also mentioned the Gallegos.
Gallegos trade. This was the trade with
Baltimore.
the Orioles acquiring a veteran starting pitcher. And I think he was an important innings eater, despite having a relatively poor season. Although I would say I probably gave up a bit too much in that trade in hindsight.
I don't think you could have had any foresight that Sean Hensley would turn into a pretty decent prospect.
Potentially, yeah. Another trade I'd like to mention before we get onto the big blockbuster trade that was made is a trade between the Mariners and the San Francisco Giants. This was the Mariners' salary dropping half of Rojas, I believe it was. I will just check. salary dropping Sergio Rojas, 50% of it for 2043 and also for next year in 2044. This is a guy who's perfectly, reasonable. He spent half the season in the pen for the Giants, was reasonable, but mostly average. Certainly not worthy of that 20 million contract he's got, and he's now 38, so already showing some signs of regression. I think I'm not too unhappy with that trade. I was able to give up. What did I give up for this? I gave up absolutely nothing.
Yeah, you ended up gaining Robbie Butler.
Robbie Butler, who is probably one of the best defensive prospects in the league in the outfield, has a outfield centre field rating of 80, left field 95, and right field 90.
He also has tremendous speed and base running skills.
Yeah, and decent stealing as well. So an arm of 80 and 75 outfield range makes him quite the player. But he probably has a maximum ceiling of a bench player, and even then, that bat is going to be quite poor. So I think he was very much a throw-in rather than a key part of that deal. Do you think that was a good trade in the end?
Yes, it gave you a little more financial flexibility in order to do some of the other better things you did.
Yeah. Now, the big trade is the sale of Kevin McAlpin. Kevin McAlpin being the #1 pitcher who had grown up in and developed in Seattle. He's a lefty and with great stuff, great movement, but not such great control. He was going to be asking for a lot of money for the next year, and indeed got a decent contract. The Cubs, who he was traded to in this trade, did wind up extending him with a deal that looks pretty good considering the market. They did then trade him off to the Iguanas, so it'll be interesting to see how that goes. But McAlpin was traded as a rental, and it's worth mentioning that Bomber also, the trade previously mentioned, was also a rental. Now, this McAlpin deal, in return, the other thing that the Mariners were taking on was a 1-year salary dump. Luis Blanco is a former all-star and I would say one of the best relievers in the league, a potential Hall of Fame candidate, but sadly had decreased to being practically worthless at the major league level, with no real hope of making a contribution. So this was a pure salary dump, for which the Cubs actually retained 55% of it. So while it was looking at 20 million, in the end, the Mariners only had to pay 8 million of that salary. The other parts of this trade were Charlie O'Donnell, who is a older but very competent left-handed pitcher. He is 26 and still hasn't made his major league debut. Whether or not he hits that 50 potential is questionable at this point, but he is still ranked very highly by the OSA, and we'll see how that goes. The headline acquisition, though, was Mike the Plug Klug, who at the time was considered around a 60 potential. I think there were lots of indications on Klug that he maybe wouldn't be able to succeed very well. He's an extreme fly ball pitcher with low movement, and his control had generally been considered an issue. It had generally been expected to be about 30, and in fact when he was drafted his control was at 20, so he was not expected to contribute much in terms of his control, but it turned out that when he arrived he started boosting, and he quickly became an 80 potential reliever, and a real future ace of the staff. Now, he had issues in his first year. He went straight into the major league for his debut on opening day, and he only had an ERA of 4.85 with a 5.34 FIP, and his season was wrecked by injuries. His back seemed to be made of fiberglass, and he spent numerous periods on the sidelines with a 4-week back strained back and a 6-week shoulder inflammation. Not long after he'd returned from the previous, along with multiple small day-to-day injuries that took him out of games. So I think it will be a question of whether his control can, really boost back up to that 60 potential, and whether that knuckle curve can develop. But he certainly still looks like a promising pitcher going forward.
Yes,
what
and
do you make of the trade?
I definitely think that you won that trade. Like he was number one. He was the number 21 ranked prospect before being traded. And I think the Lake has yet to see his greatness. I don't think he would do very well playing in Chicago with that movement because that's Wrigley's hitter's park.
Yes,
He's definitely more suited for Seattle and Safeco Field.
I would agree with that. And I
And,
think,
and, and if he
yeah,
can
go
get
ahead.
that control up and that knuckle curve can develop, you're looking at somebody with who's not going to walk a lot of people. I mean, he didn't walk a lot of people in 2018 games started, only 31 batters. But,
Yeah, it's a walk rate of 3.5, not 3.5. That's a triple 3.4%.
right.
Not 3.4%, 3.4 per 9 innings. So that's I don't actually have the percentage stats, but yeah, 3.4 batters walked per 9 innings, which is pretty good. That will average out, if you're having a 5 inning start, you're looking at probably maximum 2 people walked, probably usually more like 1.
Yeah, that's somebody you want pitching for you every night.
Indeed, and on league minimum salary.
Yes, you're going to have him for quite a long time.
Now, where are we? So I think these were the trades that we made coming into this season, but I think trades don't tell the full story with this off-season. With the money acquired, um, there was a free agent splash. Ben Lewis was acquired from the free agent pool, and while I think he looked good initially, at 10 million, it was an overpay. And he struggled for consistency as a starter. He'd have a good game and then he'd have an awful game. And ultimately, he was traded for 5 million in cash and no retention, so it wound up being a bit more, to the Colorado Rockies, where he was absolutely massacred at Coors.
Yes, 7.77 ERA in 48.2 innings pitched in Colorado. 10 games
Yes.
started.
Yeah, so
He's now a free agent.
yes. And I wonder whether anyone will want to give him anything like that contract with that finish in mind.
He might make a
Now,
better reliever than he would a starter.
yes. And he's got a good personality. He's a ground baller. There are a lot of things going for him, but I don't think he's quite lived up to his potential.
I would agree with that.
Now, another acquisition in the off season we were looking at is Padilla. Padilla is no Padula. He is a utility man. Not much to mention about him, but he was a waiver pickup from the New York Mets, and put together, 84 WRC plus is not bad off the bench, primarily covering second and third base, second base and shortstop, with some time at third base as well. 70 infield range. I think he's been a reasonable pickup for no real cost at near league minimum.
Yes, definitely a good pickup for you.
I think
Almost one full WAR.
Yeah, and I think he was a waiver claim I made on my first ever export. Now, another thing to mention with this off-season is that it wasn't just the money that was lost. 20 million off the budget was a lot, but they were also losing TJ Geller, who later signed with the Diablos for a big contract. They were losing McGowan, who was a big DH for the team, and they were also losing Espinoza, who was a relatively decent shortstop at the team. All of these guys were either going to other teams for a big contract, or were getting really quite old and were unlikely to be able to provide a similar output to previous years. Now, the other thing to mention coming into this season is that Danny Shupp, the number one prospect in all of baseball, was lurking in the wings in AAA. He didn't join the team until June, a bit of service time manipulation. But he was almost a trade deadline acquisition, but a little bit earlier with the performance he brought to the team, stabilising the team at shortstop, although he wasn't quite as good to begin with as one would have hoped.
Yes, but he is still young, 23 years old, and he's only 55 overall, but his potential is cited as 80. He hasn't reached his full home run power or contact right now.
Indeed. I think the only way for him is up.
Yes.
That home run power will be enormous if it develops, and he's already a perfectly reasonable shortstop at the major league level.
Yes, he is a very he's an above average defender.
Yes. Glusing was a mid-season pickup on a league minimum salary, and yet he wound up becoming the leadoff batter for the team going into playoffs. And I think it's now asking for 6.5 million for 3 years in free agency. So a bit of a example of what you can find dumpster diving.
Yes, he did do a good job leading off for you. He had a 361 on base percentage.
Yep.
He had 53 runs. Yeah, that's a pretty good leadoff hitter.
And he is a free agent if anyone is interested.
He's also an Iron Man.
He is, so unlikely and no compensation. It is worth noting he didn't have the greatest defensive performance, with only 45 range. Now, going into the season, I think the major issue, would you say, was pitching?
Yes. Yes, I think your pitching was pretty weak going into 2044. I mean, you ended up with a negative run differential. You allowed more runs than you scored.
Indeed, and I think we gave up we were the 9th best. So we gave up the 9th most runs in the AL. So there are only 7 teams worse than us regarding this. And our pitching WAR was 12th in the AL. Started ERA at 11th in the AL. So I think there were definitely issues. Home runs were horrible for our pitchers. We are tied for 15th with 213 home runs given up. A major part of that being Tim Turgeon, who gave up home runs at 1.8 per 9, and he's really struggled to live up to his ratings despite 3 real elite pitches. And generally a lack of development. He's hitting 25, almost 26 now. As mentioned, Gallegos had issues. He was not the starter that we'd hoped for, and that certainly caused problems. But Ben Lewis, the other one we mentioned. Around that, with Mike Klug's injuries, it was mostly a bit of a plug and play. We had various guys come in. We had Mendoza start the season, sort of more of an innings eater before he was taken out. But we had a whole bunch of guys come in. We had Dre, a knuckleballer, come in for one game. Wilds pitched as a starter. So did Sutherland, and there was just a lot of guys filling in to some better, some worse results. But the one bright point in that rotation was Mike Vargas. What do you make of Mike Vargas, Joseph?
Yeah, Mike Vargas was definitely the bright spot of your rotation. He still has some room to grow. He's only 25 years old. He has his slider isn't fully developed, but he has average stuff. But he has excellent movement and excellent control for pitches like a slider and a changeup.
Yeah, and
it was pretty remarkable that he went 15-2 with a 3.53 ERA and 1.20 ERA plus.
And I think a big part of that is the biggest issue that he faces as a pitcher is that his stuff it's not quite there for being a really good pitcher. He's only at 50 with a 96 to 98 velo. He only really has 3 top pitches, and that slider is one of them that hasn't really developed yet. The splitter is only decent. So I think by giving him a opener, which is how he performed for almost the entire season, those 2 games started were actually games where he was the opener. By giving him that opener, it allowed him to skip those first 3, real leaders of opposing lineups, and so he was able to get settled in before facing the real cannons of the opponent's offense, which made a massive difference for him.
Yes. And then you also had some other role players in that pitching staff of yours.
Yes. Kanye Hartage was a waiver wire pickup from the Expos.
Oh.
He had been abysmal in Montreal with 5.53, not 5, 7.08 ERA. This guy is a former sort of higher level prospect, 75 potential upon drafting as a starting pitcher, and still 55 potential as it stands, but at 27 and only 40 overall, there's very big questions that he'll ever reach that. But I took a chance on him. He wasn't great, 5.59 ERA, but and 5.62 FIP. But I think Apologies for that. I think he most certainly is better than some would think. His problem is that he has no options left, and I'm yet to see what we'll be doing with him next season. But he is still on league minimum, and he ate some innings for me.
And you also had Juan Ramirez as your closer.
Yes, the pen was certainly a plus this year. Juan Ramirez unfortunately, he had a couple of blown saves at the end of the year, which ruined his chances of winning the Reliever of the Year award. But I think potentially a bit of a snub for the All-Star game. 2.45 ERA and a 2.76 FIP, with a WHIP of 1.06, home runs per 9 of 0.9, and racked up. How many saves did he rack up, Joseph?
39.
39 saves. So a very strong performance from him with his elite combo of a 80 fastball and a 70 changeup, with good movement, great movement, and good control.
And you also had Demario Ramos, who also had 11 saves and pitched very well for you.
Yeah, another similar style of pitcher. 80 fastball, 70 curveball, two-pitch guy, with decent movement but good control. And he set up Ramos in a lot of these games. The Seattle Mariners had, let's find it, a 7-4 record in extra innings games and a 30-21 record in one-run games, of which almost all of those wins were games where Demario Ramos would set up the 8th inning, go through it cleanly, and then set it up for Ramirez, who would cleanly close it out in the 9th. And I think without those two, the Pythagorean record would likely look a lot closer to our overall record. Another thing to mention with the pen is the use of openers. I mentioned them previously with Vargas. Well, it wasn't just Vargas in the rotation, it was Vargas in the pen with Jorge Vargas, who was a very good left-handed reliever, and has stuck with the team for the next year. He has 2 elite pitches with a 75 fastball and a 70 slider, another good pitch with a 60 forkball, but can be let down with his movement and control, but is perfectly suited as a closer, as someone who can hopefully blast through some top guys with great stuff, and hopefully can make it through that one inning without blowing up too much. And while he did blow up on occasion, a FIP of 3.49 suggests that even though he ended with a career of 4.01, this was a very good year from him.
And another reliever you had that's been quite the journeyman, Johnny Hagedorn, who's played all over the place in the league.
Johnny Hagedorn was an off-season free agent pickup. He pretty much no one wanted him. He was a 45 reliever, Iron Man, 80 stamina, and he'd been pitching for the Royals last year. In 2042, he had an ERA of 4.29. He was 35. The league, I think, considered him pretty washed, and that he was set for decline. The league was partially right. He was set for decline, but that only happened after he had had a 3.95 ERA in April, but a 2.70 ERA in May, 1.50 in June, dropped back to 3.60 in July, and 7.50 in August, and 7.56 in September. But an excellent performance overall, with a final ERA of 3.90, and also pitching in one appearance in October for in a crucial game, with 0 earned runs, giving up in 2 innings with that appearance, and 3 innings in the postseason on 2 appearances with no runs given up. So another good find, who was a nice journeyman for the team.
I agree. I always enjoyed having him. He played for me for a little while, and I enjoyed him.
I think with his regression, he may struggle to find a new team in the next season, but a thank you and goodbye for him. Another reliever to mention is Juan Olaguibel. He spent quite a few years tarnishing in the minors after a real struggle to regain the form that led him to his major league debut. And he finally got a role on this team as a opener and lefty specialist. Brought in about a month into the season. He had a great year. If I can find him now.
It looks like 3.88 ERA in 42
ERA.
games, 9 games started, 51 innings, 1.09 ERA plus. He had a FIP of 440 though.
Yeah. There were definitely issues that he encountered. I think if you look at his splits, he had 40 innings pitched against right-handers with an ERA of 4.24. But in his 23 innings pitched against left-handers, he had an ERA of 1.54. Now, unfortunately,
That's
we
pretty
won't be
impressive.
seeing him next year.
Yeah, he's out for 10 months.
Out for 10 months. He ruptured his UCL in the final week of the season. I feel very bad for him. And I really hope that he doesn't struggle too much coming back from that. Although it does look like he's already lost some of his control with this injury.
He was a former first round supplemental pick by the Mariners in
2035.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely at least a season in the limelight for him that was earned after a while in the back rooms.
Yeah, he spent years in Tacoma.
Yeah. Hitting wise, it's a young core. Hulk Hogan, the captain of the team, put together a great bounce back from a slightly worse year in 42, hitting at 146 WRC plus with a 6 WAR of 6. Brad Legion had a great year, 124 WRC plus, slightly down on his previous year of 152, but another good year for him. And then we have a look at Ken Hendricks. This is a guy that had never really impressed too much except from in his 2041 season, which I believe was one of his earlier seasons. Yeah, that was his second season. But in a role very much playing in second base against right-handed pitchers. He hit 122, earning him a Silver Slugger, and generally just a good performance from him.
I will agree. One of my favorite players on your team is Yahim Shabazz.
Oh yeah, the centre fielder. Generally strong performer overall. What is it that you particularly like about him?
I particularly like I like players with speed. I like players who can defend.
Yeah, and he's
And
defensively fine.
yes,
65 range, 70 error, 60 arm, and 70 speed. So yeah, he's going to be a good player going forward. He is 26, almost 27, and still has 4 years left on I'd say a relatively good deal. Would you agree?
I think he's got a good deal. He's only he signed a 5-year contract worth 70.5 million, and
14 million AAV.
Yeah, 14.1 AAV. Yeah, that's
Indeed.
quite a good deal for Seattle.
Yes. Um, and I think he will be a big part of the future attempts going forward. The other guy I'd like to mention before we wrap this is Ebenol. Ebenol started the season in Modesto, single A, low A West. He hit 145 WRC plus in 61 games there. Went up to the Everett Aquasox. Only 3 games, 251 WRC plus. I decided let's put him up to double A, see what he can do. 147 WRC plus in 29 games. He was moving up again, and by the end of the season he was in Tacoma AAA, hitting 113 WRC plus. And in September I thought, why not give him a call up? And he turned up in the Major League, and on his first week hit a grand slam. And not only did he hit a grand slam, but he also hit another grand slam in playoffs, and looks set to be a strong DH going forward.
Yeah, he's definitely somebody that you're going to want to platoon with, somebody who can hit against lefties better than he can.
Yes. Yeah, I think he certainly has issues hitting against lefties. But against right-handed hitters, he's going to be a great guy.
Oh, absolutely. He got 70 power, 60 gap, 45 contact. Yeah, you're going to see some power from him.
Indeed. And it's also worth noting that that power fluctuates between 65 and 70. Now, is there anything else to mention? Farm-wise, the farm is pretty strong.
Yes.
Shup was replaced with Ospina as the number 1 pick. Ospina, in fact, even surpassed Shup before Shup left the prospect rankings, and Ospina remains the number 1 first baseman in the league. He is currently actually on the trade block, but a very strong first baseman. A number of other guys at sort of not at the top level, but good players, including, let me find it, including Sekenga, a great pitcher coming up. Wilds, we spoke about earlier. Rachel, the first round pick in this draft, looks to be a strong DH going forward, or left fielder. And among a few other guys like Markushevitz, Voki, and Jim Staley. This is also ignoring the fact that some guys like Miranda have already been traded away this offseason for major league talent, and it'll be yet to be seen how much of this farm will remain by the end of the offseason.
Yes, Jim Staley looks like he can make a debut in 2044.
Yeah, for sure. And could potentially be that other guy that platoons with Ebenol.
Yes, how does he look against lefties? Yeah, he looks good against lefties.
He looks good against lefties. I might. We'll see how that goes. Actually, he is potentially available for trades as well. So, is there anything else you'd like to mention about the Mariners? I mean, I'd certainly say I was surprised by the postseason.
I do want to point out that according to base runs, your expected wins was supposed to be 74 based on, the run differential and their expected
Yes.
run differential, because they use a logarithm that I don't quite understand, but your expected wins delta was 13 and your
Yes.
Pythagorean wins was 78. So you
So
exceeded them.
I think this is where, well, while there were aspects of good management on this team, I got lucky. I think you look at our our record against right-handed pitchers was 63 and 47 compared to 24 and 29 against left-handed pitchers, which is definitely, another factor as to why things ended up a bit more lopsided. I think the Pythagorean record is great, but often breaks down a bit at the edges. And I think this is where the Mariners exposed that a little. And the Pythagorean record also is quite, does favour home runs to a degree. And this team was definitely more of an average team with fourth in hits in the American League, although they did strike out the most in the American League.
Yes, they did.
Going forward, I think the team has a bright future. That young hitting core is going to remain together for a while. Terrian is another guy that hasn't been mentioned, who did an excellent job as the starting catcher, taking over from Nate Daniels, who was traded to the Yankees for cash at the deadline. And I think, as many of you will have seen, some big trades with Barry coming in and Haynes coming in means that this Seattle team could be an even more of a contender next year, after dropping out in the first round of the playoffs with a 2-1 loss to the Voodoo.
Oh, did we even mention that you played a game 163?
We didn't. So the Mariners required 3 wins, not 3 wins, 1 win, or the Anaheim Angels to lose 1 game for the final 3 games of the season. They proceeded to lose all 3, taking the end of the season for them to a game 163. In this game 163, Mike Vargas pitched, and he pitched an excellent performance, coming on as a follower. And in addition to that, Chris Murphy hit a massive home run. Chris Murphy, a guy that made his last appearance with the team. I think he either made the last appearance in one of the playoff games or in that game 163, as he's now been traded off to the A's as a partial salary dump. And he's a declining first baseman who hits for power but is losing his power. And yeah, that game 6-3 was chaos. My heart was beating out of my chest. I look forward to maybe a less stressful final day in the upcoming year. All right, I think that's enough for the Mariners. I think we've talked for far too long on them. Let's move on to the guys they beat in that game 163. Yes, so the Anaheim Angels, they were a playoff team in 2042 and we're looking to repeat that going into 2043. But sadly, they had their hearts absolutely crushed on the final day, well, the final day of the season for them, with a loss against the my Seattle Mariners, with a really strong final part of the season.
Yes.
So I think overall you could sum up the season as things just didn't quite fall into place.
No, and you're talking about the most successful GM in PBC history. Carlos has the most wins, but he's also been here the longest. You had a team that they had some of the right pieces in the right place, but they're just they just made some bad moves down the stretch.
Yeah, I think they lost a couple of guys in the off season as well. McGowan was a poor addition. Unfortunately, he had a very poor offensive season, and being the wrecked, injury-prone guy he is, he ended up finishing the season on the injury list, and is now a free agent. I think there were. I don't think there are any trades that we need to mention here.
No, I don't think the Angels made too many trades. At least none of great importance.
No, and taking a look at how their season went, they had a very poor start. And while they recovered a little bit, that then took a nosedive in June, and they had a very good catch-up. Their final push towards the end of the season, I didn't even see them coming, and then next thing I knew, Game 163 was happening. But I think the strong bullpen was a highlight for them. If we take a look at their overall info, they had
the
the
third.
third best bullpen ERA-wise in the American League.
Yes, they had a relatively good pitching staff and a relatively good defense. I mean, their offense was a little average.
Yeah. I think just general underperformances from some guys you'd expect more from was what sunk the team.
Yes, and like you mentioned, McGowan was one of the big ones.
Yes. The other
as well
one,
as
I think,
Jonathan Pizer.
Jonathan Pizer. Yeah. Now, the other one I want to mention is Orozco. Now, Orozco is, let me be very clear, an outstanding pitcher. I, I certainly inquired about him in this off-season about trading for him, which is not going to happen. But so I clearly rate the guy, and he did still put up a 5.5 WAR, but that is primarily down to a FIP of 3.28 because his ERA was only at 4.32. So I think potentially a season where maybe the results didn't show what he actually had to offer.
I mean, he still had a 5.5 WAR.
Yes, but what's his RA WAR? His R WAR?
His R WAR was 1.6.
1.6,
and
while
his WPA was negative 2.3.
Yeah, so while his WAR, or what it would normally be called in MLB, F WAR, is very good with over 5, that R WAR is, I think, more reflective as to how the season actually went for him in terms of the results, and I think he'll be disappointed. I think Carlos will be disappointed with the performance he got there.
I believe his WAR is so high because they calculate FIP into it, and his FIP was 3.28.
Yes. So standard WAR is calculated with FIP, and R WAR is calculated by RA per 9, which is generally more equivalent to earned run average. Little knowledge tidbit there. One of the reasons it can be very dangerous to look at WAR as a overall indicator of exactly how a pitcher performed over a year. Now, Bice was, I think you could say, a strong performer, an unexpectedly strong performer with only 50 overall. He pitched to a 3.79 ERA, and a 3.49 FIP suggests that was an earned performance.
Yes, he was one of the free agents I was trying to acquire before I was outbid by Anaheim.
And Cervantes, 3.72 ERA, not backed up with a 4.50 FIP, but a good result in total with 33 games started and 157 innings eaten. then
Branson Trevivo in the bullpen.
Brands and Treviso were nails in the bullpen. I think their one-run record of 29-16 is probably the best in the league, and is a real testament to that bullpen. Is there anyone else on the bullpen you want to mention before we look at the offense?
No, I think those guys are they're definitely the keys to that bullpen success.
Offense-wise, I think Svensson was the star, quite clearly.
Yes.
159 WRC plus, 5.4 WAR. O'Keefe was also a strong performer. Gilbert, Pennington, and Leal also had good seasons. In fact, that offense, I was shocked at quite how good it was when I took a look. But I think there were other issues at play here.
Yes.
I think,
I
yeah,
believe.
we mentioned him earlier. Pizer, a big one. McGowan.
Yes. McGowan.
And then when we start to look at the defensive performances, well, Miramontes was great in the field. That came at the cost of 59 WRC plus. Then at third base, Cartwright was good in the field. Yep, that was okay. He had a 99 WRC plus, but still not great. Pizer, a 3.5 zone rating, but with Pizer only hitting for 41 WRC plus at shortstop, it doesn't justify such a poor offensive. Only 3.5 zone rating doesn't justify such a poor offensive performance. And O'Keefe, despite his strong offensive show, had a zone rating of minus 6.4, which hurt them in the corner outfield. Fragoso, 4.7 zone rating, a strong performance. But then on the other side, Svensson, the elite offensive bat, had minus 3.9 zone rating. So I think another real Jekyll and Hyde defense that maybe let them down at crucial moments.
Absolutely. Their defense was kind of middle of the pack in the AL. They only had a plus 6.5 zone rating, which ranks 6th in the league.
Yeah. And I think, right.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue that I see for that is that the defensive issues they had weren't on mostly on replaceable guys. They were on their big offensive performers, and so this isn't an issue that's going to be easily fixed.
But they definitely need to look for another shortstop.
I think that is definitely the case, yeah. Looking at their farm, they have a decent farm. There's no real top performer here. Their top prospect is the 48th overall prospect, Chris Toller. Chris Toller, he seems close to making an impact in the majors. He's 21. He's got 70 movement potential, of which he's already reached. 60 at control, and he's only got five left on the stuff to upgrade to, but that will be his curveball and fastball, really ticking up to make him a starter rather than a borderline starter. And he spent the 43 season in AAA with a relatively good performance. So I think someone we could see quite shortly.
Yes, he definitely improved upon his 2042 season in Salt Lake.
Yes. I think in general, as we said, a season where fans will wonder what could have been, and an aging lineup could be a concern. Definitely quite a lot of older guys there. I think there's some questions about how much time they've got left, but I think the core is still quite young, and some smart off-season moves could bring the team back to playoffs next year. What do you reckon?
I think they're a little too old. Right now, they are the third oldest team in PBC. Their pitching age is 31 years of age. Their batters are 28.
Yeah. I
Even their
wonder.
minor leagues are old.
I wonder how much of that comes from people like McGowan, though, who are no longer with the team.
Uh, you still got Miramontes. You still got
Montes,
Leo
Leo,
and Rosas Demars.
yeah,
And you also got Trevello and Mata and Macbeth.
yeah, yeah. I think it's definitely safe to say that there's a lot of older guys on this team, and that can't be helping with their budget. Because with none of these guys on league minimum salaries.
Well, one of the bright spots is that they're about to after 2044 they're going to have $50 million freed up in
Yeah,
2045.
well, perhaps a bright spot to look forward to. All right, so
I mean,
it's
Carlos is one of the better GMs in the league. He's been
indeed.
to, he's 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 torn down and built these teams up before. It's
It's
going to
true.
be fun to see what he does.
Now I think I hear the sound of trash cans. Yes, the trash can Astros await us. So, what did you make of the Astros this season, Joseph?
Uh, a rather disappointing season after their stellar 2042 season.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. I think after 7 years of a drought from the playoffs, 2042 was a welcome return. But I think it was just back to bad baseball this year. Um, Long ball defined the team, and it wasn't enough. Poor hitting, poor pitching. There wasn't really a chance for the team.
Right. And some regression in some of their stars as well.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the most disappointing parts for them. Um, I think a brighter spot, looking at their team, was definitely Haddock. He proved that his rookie season was no fluke. A strong season at the plate. And then another good spot would be Abernethy having a strong first season, um, which was very positive for them. The other one, obviously, is Josh Gibson, and he may be a switch hitter, but there was no switching up with his production. Another strong season, and
Yes.
I think those were definitely the bright spots on that lineup. But beyond that, it's pretty doom and gloom.
Yes, it is.
Who would you say is the most disappointing hitter for you?
I would say Mingia.
Yeah, yeah, I think I'd agree with that. He's
I mean, this guy was second in voting in AL Rookie of the Year in 2041 with a 7.0 WAR. He lost to his teammate Josh Gibson, who had 7.1 WAR in his rookie season.
Yep, and yet now he's gone from what was it, 171 WRC plus in his rookie year, then 146 WRC plus in his second year, and now 98 WRC plus. He's dropped even below the average line, um, and I think the ratings have displayed this too. He's gone from an 80 potential to a 65, 75 current to 65. Um, and while OSA tells me he has a high work ethic, I'm not seeing that in the results.
Another area in which he absolutely declined is in base running.
Yeah, he's really not looking that great on that front. What are the statistics that back that?
You got base running value. He went from 2.7 in his rookie year to negative 6.3 in 2043.
Yeah, that's rough. Um,
His strikeout rate went up. His strikeout percentage went up. Uh, Yeah, he didn't hit as many home runs. He didn't knock in as many runs.
Indeed. I think the saddest part here is that there doesn't seem to be many underlying signs of hope for the guy. You just have to hope that he reverses the trend.
Yeah, it's pretty hard when his contact in his eye and his power is all declining.
Yeah. At least he's still just an ARB guy, so he's not tied to a massive contract.
Right.
Other guys that disappointed me a little were Kurt Brantley. He's not a great hitter, but 48 WRC plus is not good. Although he did have a good defensive season with 5.4 zone rating. I think Pat Nix, you can't be a DH and play 154 games and yet still only hit 73 WRC plus. I don't care that he's a 50 overall with a relatively poor bat. If you want to compete for playoffs, you need a better DH than that.
Oh, I would agree.
And sadly, I don't think it gets much better when we go to the rotation.
No.
I think every single starter on that team was bad. Webb, Nyako, Young, Olivas, all of them. None of them hit, all of them with an ERA of over 4.5, with only really Webb having a FIP that could even, somewhat salvage his season. And even then, it's in the underliers rather than the actual results. The fifth one was a toss-up between McMichael and Garay. Neither did a good job.
No.
And I think they finished the season with the 12th highest starter ERA with an average of 4.91, which is on the starters, which is just abysmal.
They do have some relievers who show some potential.
Yeah, for sure. I think Haber and Winfrey were very impressive from the pen. I think I feel bad for them. They rarely had leads to hold on to with the starting performance before them, and hopefully we can see more from them with a better lineup next year.
Yes.
Defensively, Brantley is a strong shortstop. Haddock was strong at right field. But have you been able to take a look at Gorman in centre field?
Oh, absolutely horrible.
Absolutely, this guy's an error machine. He has put together one of the worst performances I think we've seen in centre field in a long time. And the thing is, it's errors in the same way as Castellanos. Castellanos? Is that how you pronounce it? On the Phillies?
Yes.
He's not making errors because he can't catch the ball. He's making errors because he won't reach the ball. An outfield range of 50 in centre field with an outfield arm of 45, a defensive rating of 30. I'm not entirely sure what he was doing in centre field for the Astros, and I hope that maybe he can find a bit of redemption with the Bobcats next year.
Yes.
Uh,
He definitely doesn't look like a bad player, but he
yeah,
should be moved to left field.
for sure. Bauer was defensively poor at third. No off-the-field allegations, but this Bauer most certainly didn't have a great year. I think the sooner we leave their major league team, the better. And we can have a look at their farm, which unfortunately the bad news doesn't stop there.
Yeah, they are pretty bare, except for Ismael Salcido and Luis Polito.
Indeed. And I think Pulido was, we can get to Pulido next, but Salcedo, their number one guy, the 19th overall pick, I think they would have been horrified to see the injury he sustained mid-season with him tearing his flexor tendon. And I think, the fact that it happened, at his age, he's 24, and he's still pretty raw. That control at 35 is tough. You can already see, that control has declined significantly. At the beginning of the year, that was a 55 potential control, and now it's at 35. Um,
But
and
his
with
stuff has
movement at
improved.
45, his stuff has improved, but I think he's still got another 5 to 6 months out with that injury. And we're yet to see what his injury fragility will be when he comes back from such a major surgery, and whether or not he'll be able to get back into the swing of things. He'll certainly be looking at far more time in the minors than the Astros would have anticipated.
Yeah, he may never live up to his potential.
Yeah, I think that it could well be a career-ending injury. Pulido was a bright spot. While the out of the park devs may take with injuries, they also provide with a wonderful emergence of Pulido, a good centre fielder with great speed, good defensive profile. Robert would love this guy. The bats, there are questions. Gap power is low, which is disappointing considering the speed, and the contact and avoid Ks isn't great. The avoid power, home run power of 60 is good, and an eye of 75 potential, with 70 of that already realised, is really elite. And I think would I be accurate in saying this guy could see even the opening day lineup of 2044?
If I was Houston, I'd put him in my opening day lineup. It
Yeah, I
would
think
definitely be an improvement over Gorman.
I think the only reason I can see for not putting him in the open day lineup is to manipulate that surface time, and you you do that maybe if you're not looking to compete in the coming year. But if you're looking to compete, he has to be in that opening day lineup.
And once he's in that lineup and he gets on base, you need to give him the green light to steal.
Oh, for sure. And I think overall, looking at this team, it remains young. That is definitely a positive. Um, and it does need work, especially with the pitching. We saw that this year. Um, I think if it wants to avoid another season like this, there needs to be significant investment. Um, and I think considering the way the state the farm is in, that will probably have to come from free agency spending, or trading off some of their budget for other players, or looking at maybe packaging some guys. But I don't think that they can sustain another season like this without having to heavily consider a change in direction.
Oh, absolutely. I don't know how much they actually have in cap space at the moment.
Let me take a look. So the Astros have 4.1 million in budget space. They're running on a
Oh,
170 million budget, which is low considering their very big market size and good loyalty. I think a big factor for this is their fan interest has really, begun to hit the floor. So I think if I was the Houston GM, I'd start thinking about, well, how much money are we going to lose rebuilding at this point? The fan interest is already at the floor.
if you want to talk about the worst fan interest in the league,
I mean, yes, we've got some very questionable teams with tanking, and I think we can get onto that now. All right, so now we are climbing down the stairs to the basement where we find the Texas Rangers.
team with the worst fan interest in baseball.
50 fan interest. I think, I mean, to be honest, the fact that they've been able to do worse than the Oakland Athletics in fan interest is an achievement in and of itself.
Yes, and they also had the second lowest attendance out of all of baseball. The only team
What
that
was
had
their
worst
average
attendance.
attendance?
They had 1,005,000 160,780 fans come through. The lowest was Boston, who had 1.29 million fans.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not fun. And I think, yeah, it's another year of tanking, another year of pain. They were awful this year. There's no real way of sugarcoating it, but there are some bright spots that are beginning to appear. Have you had a chance to look at Mitch McCoy?
Yes, yes,
Yeah, I think
former Mariner.
yeah, I think he put together a respectable season with the bat and with the glove. And I feel a bit sorry for him. He basically had to watch the team fall apart around him.
But his morale is great.
Yeah, is someone with a iron fortitude mental mindset. I think Ken Eustache had a decent rookie season.
Yes.
And then
Gabe Helm,
Gabe
another
Helm.
former Mariner.
Oh, they're everywhere. I think Esteban Orozco was another strong rookie. 115 WRC plus. I don't know. Did he play at shortstop? Let me have a look. He played a little at shortstop, but primarily at second base. I think this guy's going to be maybe defensively not the best, but his bat's pretty reasonable.
Yes. Yeah, I think he's better suited for second base than for shortstop.
Yeah, for sure. And potentially, I could see him going to third actually, if that because he didn't have a great season at second, and maybe he'll be better suited at third depending on who comes through. He is of course a first round pick from the 2040 draft, although quite a low ranked pick there. I think when we talk about the Texas Rangers, we have to acknowledge that this is a team that Mike took on only a couple of years ago. They've spent many years in the wilderness with a long, painful, rather misguided rebuild that's only really, I think, now beginning to show any sort of dividends.
Did you say Mike?
Is it Mike?
No, it's Nick.
Nick with the Rangers. Nick.
Yes.
My bad, Nick. Wrong name. Is the Rangers held by Mike in RLB?
Yeah, Elder Mike.
There we go. That's my mistake. I think yeah. So hitting wise, there were some good prospects. Is there anyone else on the hitting side you want to talk about?
No, maybe just Kamani Pulsey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you make of him?
Yeah, he has high adaptability, high work ethic. I mean, he had a little bit of a dip in a production from 2042 in a full season in 2043, but still, that's something to work with going forward.
Yeah, for sure. And that's it's a really strong arm with 70. I think he's going to be a defensively strong third baseman. And if he ever plays at first, he's an elite first baseman there as well.
Yes, and he looks like he met good platoon. Batting against lefties.
Yeah, I think if we look at his splits, he definitely hits better against left-hand pitchers. On the pitching side, I think that it was less of a bright spot, quite a dark spot really, with generally decent potential pitchers, but guys who I don't think were quite ready for for Major League Ball. I think,
Like Dave Owens.
yeah, I think. Let me just get the pitching up again.
Joe Jett.
Joe Jett. Joe Jett is, I think, one of the saddest stories of the year. This is a guy with real elite potential, who's already looking relatively decent, who was trying to come back from a relatively poor rookie season and was just cut down with a torn elbow ligament. He's likely going to miss a decent amount of the 2044 season, and this is all in what should have been a breakout year. I really feel for the Rangers there. I think that's a very unlucky situation, especially with them looking at arbitration in 2045. Losing those cheap years can be incredibly painful, especially with the financial situation being as it is with their fan interest.
Yes. I would say another bright spot in their rotation is Dan Veslage.
Yeah, yeah, he had a poor year. 4.87 ERA, but it is a rookie year, and I think on any other team he would have spent the year in AAA. So I think for a lot of these starters in this rotation, they don't necessarily need to be upgraded, but they need time, and um, only time will tell how many of them are able to survive in this baptism of fire that they've been given. The bullpen, the less said about it, the better. Appleby had 11 innings played and wasn't completely atrocious, with a 3.18 ERA, but a small sample size and only 0.1 WPA. There were only 29 saves the entire season. This was from Pat Hicks. He's probably the other real standout guy. I wouldn't be shocked to see the guy traded, as he's doing a very good job on this team, and his contract will be running out at the end of 2044. I'm honestly surprised he hasn't been traded sooner.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, he's a great reliever. He should somebody should snag him.
Yeah, for sure. Um, Speaking of other guys that are worth considering here, no, actually no. Looking at the defense, I mean, they had Rosette was awful at second base, and in centre field, Pisano and Kling Smith were equally as bad as each other. McCoy probably the sole bright spot there. And I think with that, unless there's anything else you want to add on their offensive side
Yeah,
of things, best look at their farm.
they do have some nice farm pieces.
Yeah. I think it's not, the farm is nowhere near the level I would have expected, considering how long the team has been in the wilderness. For so many years of tanking, I would hope to see more top picks. Guys with 70 to 80 potential. But we only really have one guy there, which is Ed Walker from the 2043 draft.
Right.
And I think he's been an excellent pick. He's made rapid progress, and I wouldn't be shocked to see him in the league by next year. And that's definitely going to be a welcome sight for the few fans that still attend Rangers games.
Yeah, I think a turnaround is coming real soon for the Rangers. They've been this has been a long rebuild, and it's been they've had 2 or 3 different GMs engaged in this rebuild. I think Nick is definitely the guy who's going to pull them out of this slump.
I think they have a prospect-wise, they have a very interesting guy in Sean Thomas. So I was having a look at what happened to their first round pick in 2041, and it turns out Sean Thomas is that pick. He's now down at 21 on their rankings. Now this is a two-way player. He has, decent fielding ratings in center field, and some decent power and contact. But in general, that bat is not what I would expect of a 60 potential player. Pitching wise, he's very raw with 30, 25, but potential of over 50 in each of those ratings. Although with only having 2 real pitches, he was looking at only really being able to pitch in relief, which, considering the bat at time of draft, would have probably been a waste. Sadly, he's seen quite a significant decline from his peak at 80 to now one at 60, and with generally poor performances in the minor leagues, I think he's a bit of a concern at this point.
I would have to agree.
I think he's quite potentially one of those guys that's a favourite to bust from that first round. But in general, there's a lot of other interesting guys. Is there anyone you want to mention particularly?
I think we might be seeing Mike Sloan come up at some point next season.
Yeah. Mike Sloan
And
being the second baseman.
yes,
Though he can also play shortstop, I think. Depends.
yeah,
He's
he might
certainly
have
been
to.
playing short in the minors.
Yes,
I
and
think it
that's
would be
definitely.
I think it would be a rapid rise for him to go to get to the majors next season, considering the fact that he's only ever played as high as able.
Yes, another guy that they may be seeing is Dan Janner.
Yeah, let's look.
This guy has elite defense,
Oh, for sure.
and
Yeah,
he's got great contact, great gap power, great power, and a great eye.
yeah. We'll have to be improving though on that performance in AA that he had in 2043 to make an impact in the majors. I'd expect to see him spend some time, maybe in AAA, before making the promotion up.
And what about this trade?
Right, yes, trade. What was the trade?
In January of 2043, the Texas Rangers traded left fielder Rob Parsons to the Washington Nationals for uh, starting pitcher J.J. Carlson and a fifth-round pick that later became Tim Jowers. And Parsons is valued for his defense, and that's basically why Washington, at least that's why I believe Washington made a trade for him. But the interesting thing is J.J. Carlson.
Yeah, he's, I think, boosted a bit since that trade.
Yes, he
And
has.
I think development is definitely a concern for him. He's definitely on the older side for how raw he still is.
Oh, he's
But I think,
20.
yeah, yeah. But I think considering, he really hasn't made much progress yet. Um, and I think it will be a question of how that goes when it comes to evaluating this trade. But not something the Nationals could really have foreseen.
Right.
Tim Jowers is, reasonable. He's young at 18, so has time. But I think is more of a wild card rather than a serious part of that trade.
Oh, absolutely.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to mention regarding the Rangers?
No.
All right. Well, time to get pest control as we're heading to the Coliseum. Okay, so for the last team in the AL West, we are looking at truly an awful piece of baseball. The Oakland Athletics. I think um, I think in spite of John Fisher no longer being in control of this team, uh, LaPaglia is a man after his heart. Truly an awful season, and not much for the fans to watch at the Coliseum.
No, not at all. One of the worst run differentials, the least amount of wins, 290 winning percentage. Yeah, it was absolutely horrible. But what Luke has built in Oakland is about to turn for the best.
Indeed, we'll be having a look at that farm later, but that should be a scare for any team that's going to compete with them, including me and Joseph. Um, Now, in terms of bright spots, there was one, Mike Tucker. He's gone now.
Yes, yes,
No one good can remain on the Athletics for long. And so, indeed, Mike Tucker was traded to the Giants for a decent haul. I think Arturo Aguinaga is a strong prospect. We had Robert on earlier talking about actually not earlier, it will actually now be later for when you guys hear it, in the NL section of this episode, probably in part 4, I expect.
yes.
But we're looking at, yeah, a pretty good haul for that I think both sides can be happy with.
Well,
Would
I
you agree
agree.
with
I
that?
think. Oh yeah, I would agree. I think they picked up two good prospects in Aguinaga and Monzo.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I think in terms of other performances here, we're looking at Case had a good season.
Yes,
Um, I
John
think
Taylor had a good season in his rookie year.
yes, it was a small contribution considering he only had 190 at bats or 189. But in those at bats, he performed very very well.
Yes,
Already accruing 2 WAR with under 50 games. And I think one of the big pieces that is coming around the corner for Oakland here. The other bright spot was Salcedo, but he is now a free agent, so I'm not sure quite how much of a bright spot that was, considering there were very few fans in the stadium to watch him, and it certainly didn't contribute to much of a season at all.
Right.
And it's not like they're also getting no compensation for his free agency. Pitching wise, this is
Nothing.
nothing. Yeah, there is nothing here. They have rolled out a AAA pitching lineup at best, and I think I may well have seen better pitching performances in home run derbies. Yeah, it was not a good year. Starter wise, they had 3 starters with an ERA of over 6, one with a 5.91, and their best starter had an ERA of 4.92. None of these had good seasons fit-wise, and I would expect all 5 of them, except, I don't know, 4, maybe let me correct myself. Canseco has a future, potentially, although he's getting quite old for that for that development, and I can see why Oakland rushed him from high A to the majors this year. He certainly is in need of quick development to be able to fulfill on that 60 potential. And Chad McQueen, who I believe is available on the trade block, is another guy that is, relatively underdeveloped for his potential, considering his age of 26 years old. He also had a poor season. So, what do you make of those two guys?
I would say that McQueen's nearing the end of his usefulness or his value. But I think Canseco still has a little bit in him.
Yeah.
He was a Rule 5 pick. That's one of the reasons he was on, that he was forced to pitch out there when he hadn't fully developed yet.
Yeah, nabbed from Boston.
Right.
So I think that's a good Rule 5 pick, actually. Let me have a look at his ratings. Yeah, it appears someone that maybe should have been protected. He was boosting around that time, but I think even
Now it
then,
looks like he's regressing a little.
yes. Yes, now I've looked at the scouting, his potential now looks like more like 50 than 60.
Right.
Relief wise, I think Delinsky had probably, maybe Michael was decent as well, but Delinsky and Mike Michael were probably the only real watchable performances in the pen there.
And Michael could see himself as a starter.
Yeah, for sure. He's certainly got the pitch mix to do it. Although I think we'll probably want to see more of that change-up development, because right now we're only really looking at 2.5 pitches.
And
defensively,
their
sorry, go
fielding
ahead.
was atrocious.
Yeah, defensively, Zavala had a good year, but there's no production on him offensively, so I don't see much of a future there. And Marmon and
Conte.
Case were truly bad.
Yes.
I think
But
they'll live
Taylor,
long in the nightmares of any fans that A's fans that watch them.
Taylor had a 2.9 zone rating and 404 innings played.
Okay, yeah,
That's that's a bright spot. If he had that would be about what 6 or 8 zone rating if he had played a full season.
yeah, yeah. And I think it's a good time to segue into looking at their farm. And the farm will grow stronger. It is the deepest farm in the league by some distance. Um,
Yes, they have
and
234 points in the minor league rankings that the OSA does, and that's a full 110 over the next team, and that's Montreal.
yeah, for sure. I think the top three guys of Taylor, McDonald, and Friedlander um, are real elite guys. Then even when you drop down, you look at some of the other guys, and it's a sea of blue. Even their number 8
Yes.
prospect is of a caliber that most teams would be perfectly happy to have as their number 1 guy. Um, and after that, it's not just yellow. You've still got a ton of very good players going down. Quite the distance. And while Taylor and McDonald and Freelander are, certainly on their way, um, I think with a few more years left to go with this rebuild, there's room for even more people to join this farm. And I think both me, yourself, and to anyone else in the AL should be quite worried about the future Oakland team that could take us all surprised after years of taking their tanking for granted.
I do believe that we may be seeing Alfredo Maldonado at some point next season,
Yeah,
and we may also be seeing some of Juan Ojeda.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked considering the state of the team as it is. I'd be very surprised to see any of these guys on their roster on opening day, except maybe John Taylor, who's already made his debut. I think anyone who's not made his debut yet will likely be featuring no earlier than mid-June, as they will likely be looking to manipulate some service time there. But I think we certainly are looking at a much brighter season next year, and most certainly a much brighter future.
Oh, absolutely. They will be a team to reckon with in the future.
Right. Is there anything else you'd like to add with the A's?
No.
No. Okay, cool. One last thing I'd like to mention is the owner that I mentioned, Paglia, earlier. He is not quite Fisher. He is actually considered charitable according to his finance. So I think that once some of these, better players come into this team and the popularity rises and that fan interest starts to go up again, we could actually see a more less financially constrained team than some of the Oakland teams that we're used to seeing in real life at the moment. Right, so that brings us to the end of the AL West and also the AL as a whole. I think we had a very exciting season in the AL West this year.
Yes. It was
Um,
uh it was probably one of the most fun divisions to watch.
yeah, for sure. I think we had 5 teams who were, really competing up until the final day. The Anaheim Angels only really competing for the wild card, and the Mariners really falling off in that last month. But the three-way fight between the Grizzlies, Twins, and Sultans continued all the way to the final day, and it was certainly a pleasure to watch.
It was definitely really, really great the way the schedule worked out.
Yeah, seeing all of these teams, the Grizzlies, Twins, Sultans, Mariners, and Angels fight each other over the final few weeks was a real climax to the season. And I think the drama only intensified with that game 163 between the Mariners and Angels.
Oh, absolutely.
All right. I think going forward, we can see to the next year, we can see this division only getting more intense, with the Rangers starting to come back from their tank, Oakland beginning to get stronger, the Astros probably looking to get stronger as well. They can't really get much worse than last season. The Angels, Carlos will likely be looking for more again. I think he will be looking to get at least one more season out of this team. And I think all four of the competitors in the Grizzlies, Twins, Sultans, and Mariners will be looking for another strong season. So we'll be having another exciting fight in the AL West. And I think the AL East will struggle to get a look in at the wildcards.
I agree with that.
And the only team I can really see making a push towards the wildcards in the AL East is probably
Toronto.
Toronto. Yeah, I'd agree with that. Or the Voodoo. I could see the Toronto overtaking the Voodoo if the Voodoo follow through on their promise to rebuild.
Yeah, so it'll be 2044 is going to be a fun season.
Yeah. Well, this concludes part 2 of this episode. We've now looked at the American League, the AL, and I think there'll likely be a day's gap between the release of this, or a little bit more between the release of this episode, this part, and the next 2 parts. But we look forward to seeing you again, and it's been great. We'll see you next time.
Bye.